Yeah, g'day folks, just Ben again here. Just wanted to continue our discussion from the last session on specific growth rate and the reasons we might want to use it. So in the last session we covered off on that, I guess, the theory behind the way we would want to use, the way that specific growth rate is calculated, and we would have come up with the formula that looks something like this. ln, and the ln is the natural log function. And we would have weight final minus the natural log of weight initial multiplied by 100, and then essentially it's just divided by our time frame. So that's our formula there, as it would be written out if we were to look at it as a function realistically, so without any numbers in it. The reason we use this log function over here, which we have discussed in the past, is due to the fact that as the fish grow, their growth rate changes, and that will happen from day 1 to day 2, day 2 to day 3. So over that period of time, or any period of time, we can't really compare them very well, and a really good way for us to get around that is to use this natural log function, which means we can realistically in mathematical terms compare any individual day of growth or a batch of time, I guess is probably the easiest way to say it. So what we've got here is I just set up a little table of an example of what a specific growth rate calculation might be on a really simple basis. So we've got over the top of all of our data there, we've got the sizes of the fish pellets that we might use, the recommended time frame, or sorry, not the time frame, the recommended size ranges that we would feed those fish to, and these are just examples, they're not anything realistically at this point in time. And then we've got a starting weight for each of those brackets and an ending weight, and realistically on a fish farm this would require some manual input, so we would have to go out and physically perform a batch weight check or an individual weight check, or alternatively for animals that we can't weigh for whatever reason it might be, we might have to measure them, and this formula would be translatable. Instead of using weight final and weight initial, we could use length final and length initial, so it can be interchangeable with units of measurement. And then we've got a time frame down here, so between 50 and 60 grams we had 10 days elapse. Between 120 to 250 grams we had 80 days elapse. So realistically, I might just zoom in on this so that we can see it a little bit better. The formula is going to come out, and in Excel the formula is always going to be starting with an equal sign. So if you start writing something in and you're not getting, so if I started doing ln and then started clicking around on my weights, it's not going to let me do it. So you're going to be like, oh, what the friggin' hell's going on? It's not going to recognize that you're writing a formula until you put an equal sign in. So we're going to go ln final weight minus the natural log, or ln, of our initial weight, and then we're going to multiply that answer by 100. But to make sure that that's correct, or to get it to do what it needs to do, we need to put a couple of brackets around the log functions, because we want Microsoft Excel to calculate those before it uses the multiplication function over here. And then we're going to just divide it by the number of days that we had. And in the last tutorial we used the example of t final minus t initial, or t final minus t start, whatever you want to call it, and realistically that's just going to give you the time frame, and in this case I'm happy to just plug in the number of days. Alright, so and at this point our answer comes out. We would have described it in the last tutorial that your answer is going to come out in a percentage of the biomass of the fish that we have, and we'll use that in a later session. I think we've got 3 or 4 more sessions before we start to talk about feeding efficiency and so on and so forth. But we can use this formula to predict how much feed we should be potentially feeding to our fish based on how old they are and their feed conversion rate, so on and so forth. So at this point in time, if we had say 100 fish in here, alright, we can basically use this percentage on that equals this times by this plus this. Alright, to tell us how much, sorry, it might not be the plus, that doesn't look right, equals this times by this. Alright, to tell us how much food is going to be fed to those 100 fish over that period of time each day. So that's just a really quick example of what we could use to do it with. And then just going to delete that bit out of there because I don't want it in there anymore. So because it's just an example. So all I did up here was to put my formula in, and because everything's laid out in columns nice and neatly next to each other, I can just simply, I'll remove that out of the way, I can just simply hover on this little green box down in the corner here, left click on my mouse button, drag it across, and it performs the autofill function. So providing that there's the right information above it, sorry, next to it in each column, we can do that autofill function without too many issues. Now what we want to do is to shift over to another spreadsheet where I'm going to predict what our feed schedule might look like at the other end in terms of the volumes or of fish and so on and so forth. So realistically, what we want to do is to link our sheets. So over here I've brought it across, and I've just gone over to here and I've put my SGRs at the top for these fish, or for these brackets of time, whatever it might be. And what we have out of that is a link up in here, right, where it says sheet B12. And all I've done to get that is to just delete that out of there. I'll zoom in. All I've done is put the equal sign in there, pop back to the sheet that I was on originally, and just clicked it and pressed enter, and it's just gone equals the cell on the other sheet. And then because everything's laid out like I said a minute ago, I can just fill it all across and it's all the same. So if I changed a factor over here, let's say instead of the fish growing from 50 to 60 grams in that bracket, we'll put in 65, this SGR down here will update. Alright, and we get 2.6, shift across to here, and I'm going to get a 2.6 over here. So it's just a quick way of being able to link everything up. We've just got to make sure that we don't make mistakes anywhere along the line. Alright, so now what we wanted to start with up here is we started with our fish at 100 grams over here. Oh sorry, they started at 50. And we want to get them to 60. So this is what we might call a rolling forecast, or a really simple forecast about how many days are going to elapse and how much food we may need to do in that bracket. But for today we're just going to do how many days are going to elapse, even though we've calculated it here. Sometimes we just need to see it in terms of the amount of days, so on and so forth. So this is off the farm. We've taken historical data. Over here we might be using these SGRs off some predicted researched information. So we've gone and found out information from the feed supplier, for instance, that says that your fish in the 2 mil bracket are going to grow on average 1.8% per day. Or we might have researched it from some literature based on the animal that we're trying to culture, and they might say SGRs are achievable of 1.8 in the 50 mil to 100 mil bracket, or 50 gram to 100 gram bracket. So this one over here is a bit more of a historical analysis. This one here would be predicting based on information that we may already have, I guess is the way to say it. So how are we going to do that? It's quite easy for us to do it. It just takes a little bit of thinking about what's going on. So we're going to go equals 50 multiplied by 1.8, and that's going to give us the percentage. So if I press enter there, it's going to say my fish have grown to 91 grams in that day, if that makes sense. And then if I fill down, alright, it just starts to do this weird stuff where it's like, oh, hang on a tick, why am I doing that? And really what all that is the fact that when we fill down from here, it's thinking that the next cell down is what it needs. So I filled down, it's moved down one column. So to get around that, the column that we want to reference, or the cell that we want to reference, this is B5. In our formula, we can put a couple of dollar signs in there. So Shift 4 on my keyboard. So one before the B and one after the B. That's just going to lock it to cell B5, and even if I move sideways, it's going to not. It's going to lock it to the next cell across. It should do anyway. Oh no, it's filled it, it's used cell C7, but it's locked to B5, so it doesn't really matter where I go, it's going to stay locked at B5. Anyway, so we can fill down. And something has gone wrong there, and I can see what it is. Alright. The SGR is in percentage, but it's multiple. It's not thinking that it's in a percent. So we can just come up in here and show you what that does. Alright, so it's actually telling me I've got 182% growth, which isn't correct. So what we need to do up there is to convert that across into into a percentage that makes sense, and we'll change that out of there to back to a general number. Right, simply we're just going to divide it by 100. Alright, and I think we should be able to do that. Alright, so dividing that number by 100 puts it actually in a percentage, and now if we went in there and put percentage behind it, it should pop up as what it should be, 1.82%. Alright, thought that growth was pretty quick. Anyway, without wasting too much more time, we can simply go in here and go equals 50 multiplied by 1.8. Alright, and that looks a bit weird. Alright, that's not what's really going on. All we've calculated there right now is the portion of growth on that fish. So between day 1 and day 2, the fish grew 0.9 of a gram. Alright, so what we have to do to counteract that is to use, we have to add that back to our 50 that we started with. Alright, so we've now grown to 50.9 grams. Alright, and now if we lock cell B5 with the dollar signs, press enter, and we can fill down, we should be able to get the amount of days that have elapsed. What did we say it was? Around about 10 days before we hit 60 grams, and that's pretty close. We shouldn't go anywhere further than that. If we've got these little number brackets over here, it just means that the cell's not big enough to have the actual numbers in there. So if I shorten the cell down, you get all these numbers changed to hashtags. Just to do that, you can just double click up there between the A and the B. You'll see the pointer on the cursor change. So I can expand my cells doing that, or I can just double click between it and it auto resizes. So what we want to do next is just copy and paste the next cell across, and just paste values so that we don't get the formula transferred across, and then we go again. So equals this multiplied by our SGR at the top, and then add that back to our initial one. And that's what I said, I think in the last scenario, in the last session, we spoke about the SGR formula very much representing compound interest. So we just want to go through and keep adding the growth on to what the growth was already beforehand, not on the original, not trying to add it to the original. We're always adding this on to the day previous to it, I guess is the way to say it. So from there we can go back through, and we can, in our formula again, we can go again and lock cell C5 this time instead of B5. So we want to lock it to that, and then we can just drag it down until we hit our marker, which I think was 200 grams. Oh no, it's going to be 60 to 100. Have I made a boo-boo in there? I have made a big boo-boo in here. This should say 50 to 60, 60 to 100. Anyway, we'll just go from 60 to 100 in that 4 mil bracket. It's a bit of a boo-boo on my behalf. Equals this, sorry, equals this, not going to work. Equals this multiplied by this plus this. Alright, and then we can just fill down, and we'll go from 60 to 100. Oh, and we forgot to put the dollar signs in there. Just whack them in, press enter, we'll go back and we'll fill down. And we can see that as we're moving forward, the length of time it takes to get to the next bracket is quite a bit longer, which represents the slowing in growth that we discussed on that growth curve yesterday. So what I want you to, or sorry, not yesterday, in the last session, because you might have gone back-to-back sessions. What I want you to do for me now is to replicate this spreadsheet. So just go back and copy what I've got down here. So start with this spreadsheet here, replicate what I've got. I try not to copy what I've got, try to use the formula yourself. Come back over here and then complete this spreadsheet out as well for me. And then from there, just send it through to me via email and I'll have a look and just make sure that it all looks okay. Alright, but for now, I'm going to say goodbye and we will start on another session very shortly.